No sé si se me oye. ¿Se me oye? Sí. Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todos y gracias.
Sorry about well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Maria Zavala. I'm a journalist. I have 3 kids. I'm working as a consultant in education, digital education. Every week, for one reason or other, I meet students, teachers, parents, and all the professionals involved in education, and of course education in the field, in the world, in the digital world, and how to assist accompany new generations in this world that they have to cope with, and that we have to cope with too and live in. And because I meet with these people so many weeks, every week I have a lot of discussions, conversations about concerns, issues. Do we know where we're going? Do we not know where we're going? Do we have any answers? Are we asking ourselves the right questions? In the end, it seems like we have we have a lot of information, but we don't know what we're doing. And I think it's not new. Education has always been a concern. We have kids, we have children, they're growing up, and we want them to make the most of their capabilities and to have the right tools. Hello, can you hear us? To live in the best possible way, both in the professional and personal lives, to be the best. And we have a lot of hopes for them. It's a sea of opportunity and challenges too. And education with a lot of opportunities and so on. If we add to that the impact of digitalization of society, there's a bigger, now it's from the sea, we move on to an ocean of opportunities, of concerns, of issues, and lots of opportunities and hopes. Now, on education, and by that I mean transfer of knowledge and teaching. Now, introducing technology here means a lot of things, practical and theoretical. I can think of a few. Practical things would be technical projects in schools, platforms through which schools communicate with students and parents and teachers, score the students. We talk about all sorts of apps to learn, to introduce technology in the classroom, the digital blackboard, so that they have a computer so they can start getting used to the screen. Technology in the classroom is also about the inverted classroom, online learning. You do, I watch, is you do, I watch, I do, you watch. There's a different role now for the student. There's more interaction. There's a greater interaction. And a child watches a video on the planets, on YouTube, then they discuss it in the classroom. There's constant recycling of teachers. It's a revolution for kids. Families adapt to this. And educational systems too. So a lot of theories in the end, a lot of practices, a lot of opinions, not only controversial, but sometimes in opposite directions. We're talking about new teaching methods, teaching methods with new tools, and again, we end up coming back to these uncertainties, the same doubts, the expectations, and then many questions, which is what we want to start today's event. Questions such as, what is online learning? What's it for? What's fit classroom? What's blended learning? Instruction or disruption in education? What does focusing teaching in the student based on the skill sets? What is to try to oversee the use of a device in the classroom? What role does the teacher play? Role of the student? Of how do families have to manage this? I have children. The school has a technological project, and there's all sorts of discussions coming up. And how will education be? Future education. Will technology impact them more? How will they learn? We often ask ourselves, do we have to tell them everything? Because everything is they have a search engine. Do we need to teach them all these things? Yes, they want to learn because they need to be able to search and find. It's an endless list of questions. And in that context, as Pablo was just saying a moment ago, we hold these EnlightED conference in which a number of experts, international experts, will meet. It's been organized by a number of bodies to talk about reinventing education in the digital era. Not answering all the questions, but rather reconsidering the questions we should ask ourselves. What are the relevant questions? What do our students need to learn? What do children need to learn? What's the best way of transmitting that knowledge for their professional future, for the careers you're going to develop, which we have to talk about, which we want to talk about, high school, university, what they're going to experience. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, and also the school, which is, I think we'll talk about that on Friday. And I remember more than a year ago I said the same thing. It's not the keyboard, it's the person that matters. It's not the device or the app or the social media that matters, or whatever screen. Is not just the mouse. Things happen by themselves. There's a people, someone behind that makes a decision or strikes enter. So ultimately, we're educating people, and people have to get used to living in a world which is not exactly the way it used to be. When I speak to parents, they say, we do want to educate our children in the way we experienced it back in the 70s and 80s, or perhaps 80s, or perhaps the year 2000, gosh. But childhood was very different because they're living in a very different time. So in the framework of enlightenment, we're holding today's event, and I think we're very fortunate because we have Daniel and Michael to talk to us about very interesting things related to some of these questions that we can consider, such as how do we encourage children to want to learn, how to inspire, how to enthusiasm, how to make children enthusiastic about learning, and also show them that there's something they can do that's useful, that they can do something useful with that. To talk about new ways of teaching for children that have new ways of learning. We can talk about what is to innovate in the classroom. What does that mean? Because we talk about innovation in a very straightforward way, but we don't know what we're really talking about, do we? And Michael, we'll talk about that with Michael. What does innovate mean? And let me introduce him. Anyways, on my right,
India. Founder and worker in the Riverside School in India, and I encourage you to see some experiences because it's amazing what they do with children in this school. She works in making the atmosphere friendlier for children, and founder of a movement for children present in more than 60 countries, including Spain. She will also tell you more about it. And on my left, Michael Warren, founder of Clayton Christensen Institute, where he works to raise awareness about the power of innovation, disruptive innovation, in the fields of education, primary and secondary education. He works in Untangled Ventures and Untangled Solutions, where he offers services for higher education institutes. He's written several articles about innovation in education. For those of you in the audience and people following us on streaming, I invite you to participate. Those of you following us through the social media or on your cell phones, you can use our hashtag otra educación. And Kira, Kiran is going to start since she's the lady here today, so ladies first, but also because she works with children, small children, very young children, and Michael also works with basic education, what we call basic education, but he's also specialized in higher education. Kiran, please.
In that introduction. And so thank you for having us here, and excited to be back in Telefonica. I was here a couple of years ago because I think the basic sentiment of Telefonica's mandate of children, innovation, and the future are kind of exactly what all of us are at least bothered with. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you are parents here? How many have children? Right? So I think the question I'm going to ask you is simply this. How many of you will take your child back to a doctor that prescribes wrong medication for your child? Your child had a fever, but the doctor took out a kidney. How many of you would say, oh, let's give them another chance? Would anybody go back to a doctor that gave wrong medication? What about maybe a restaurant that serves, outdated, sort of unhealthy food? And yet we take our children back to schools that serve obsolete, redundant pedagogy in the name of education. And we say, but there is no other choice. And I think this is exactly how my story started. I mean, I did not want to get into education. I was a designer by profession, having a wonderful life. And then I became a mother. And my whole life changed. And that's exactly how I realized that this idea... Can we start my presentation, please? I just want to kind of give you a little sense of what we're struggling with. So I think in the world that I am living in, and when it was many, many years ago, I realized that there was this huge crisis of compassion. Yeah, I went to my son's school. He was all of 6 years of age, and I remember 3 months into the school, I went and asked the teacher, "Tell me about my son. Tell me how wonderful he is, who his friends are, what does he like to do?" And she looked at me with this teacher expression. He said, "What is his roll number?" And just like that, my son didn't even have a name. He didn't have a story. He was just one statistic of a child going to school in India. And in India, we have 300 million children going to school. So many of our children are just being lost. They just become part of, the numbers of a country to say how many children go to school. And we kind of just club them all as one big number. And this is what I've understood, that this idea of compassion and the crisis is really in the world we live in right now. We have fear, we have intolerance, we keep telling our children to be scared of the other, to have a competition with each other because we say, no, you need to get ahead. And we keep thinking that if we make the world unsafe for our children, the world is going to get safer. That is not true. In the world we live in, it is the idea of the other. And it's starting now in our schools. So this is what's happening. For 15 years of our children's life, we tell them, "Oh my God, your education is very important. You must learn the height of Mount Everest. You must learn about photosynthesis and quadratic equation." I still don't know why we need to learn quadratic equation. And grammar. And in the same 15 years, we don't have the time to tell our children to care about inequality or child rights or compassion. And this is not for one day or for 1 year, for 1 month or 1 year. It's for 15 years of our children's life. For 15 years, we tell our children that, you have no time, but you have to listen to what we do. And then we wonder why are children not creative, empathetic, responsible citizens of the world. But it's not going to happen by chance, right? So isn't the purpose of education to be this, that every child graduate with passion and compassion, content and character, doing good and doing well? But hope is not the strategy, that one day children will wake up and suddenly they're all these wonderful citizens of the world. And this is where design thinking comes in. This is Dave Kelly. And once, very long back, he said this. He said, everything you see around you has been designed by man except nature. So the seats we live in, we're sitting on, the phones that we use, the technology that we keep talking about, it's all been designed by man except for nature. And it got us thinking, what if we could design human nature? Is there some sort of a formula that could get children to actually be empathetic? See, we are human by chance, right? We are born into this species by chance, but can we become humane by design? Is there some sort of a way that every child can graduate with character and compassion? Well, to start thinking about this, I started the Riverside School in 2001 with this simple mandate. Can every child graduate with an I can mindset, that I'm not helpless, change is possible, and I can drive it? The idea of starting with empathy, the idea of starting with the human heart, and not just with the what and the how of education. How are we doing it? Well, we created a simple 4-step formula. Feel, imagine, do, and share. We call it FIDS for kids. And using this design thinking formula, we start with feel, empathy, the first E of being humane. The second is imagine, ethics. If you're telling somebody something can be better, you must take the responsibility for better. That's ethics. The third is excellence. The idea that when you do something, you must have quality, not compromises and mediocrity. And the fourth is elevation. The idea that we're not competing with each other, but we're completing each other's stories. These 4 E's are taking us from being human to being humane. And how does it happen at Riverside? I'm going to give you just one small example.
4 simple steps. Feel, imagine, do, and share. Just start by first feeling. What are you trying to solve?
The problem was that Sunil bhai, he likes to do a lot of work, but then he had to run back and forth. Sunil bhai had to go everywhere.
Then we said, what do we do after we understand? We imagine a preferred scenario. There is the imagine.
We hear each other's ideas so that we can come up with better solutions. First of all, like Earth had got the idea that we can make a belt. We were making a jacket. We thought we will make lots of pockets.
And then you go out and do the action.
We illustrated first how the belt will look. We first cut the sleeves. We stitched, then we cut. Then we sticked on 3 sides and so it became a pocket.
And then you share it. I think one of the key things that we've learned is we were not sharing. We were just not sharing enough in education.
We talked about with him that why we made this for him, how would he be useful for him. We were telling him he cannot waste his time and his energy. He was feeling happy because now he didn't have to run all over the place to find a key. He just had to take it out from his pocket and give it to the person who wants the key.
To have our children have creative confidence is probably the greatest gift you can give them. Well, they are the 2 most powerful words in the English language. I can.
And that's what we're saying. Young children, we keep thinking about them as age. We say, oh, you're too young, not now. Maybe when you're 18, maybe when you're older. And we keep thinking that age has everything to do with competency. But the whole point of our children's lives is in the first 2 years on the planet, they tell us, look at me, mama, I can. They go from crawling to sitting to standing to laughing to learning how to speak. And just when they're doing that, we send them to school and say, oh, no, you can't. You have to sit down. You have to listen to us. You can run. No, that's the wrong answer. So the point of this I can mindset starts right from those planting of those seeds. And that's how we get children who are empathetic, creative, and confident citizens of the world. Right? So now that we knew it was working, we said, okay, it has to go to everybody. So in 2009, we took the same 4 steps, feel, imagine, do, share, and started Design for Change. And here we gave children across the world a simple challenge. We said, take one idea, choose 1 week, and change 1 billion lives. So today, children in over 65 countries are using the feel, imagine, do, share to change the bad and make it good with the power of the ideas. And for the first time, the adults are listening to children. Rather than telling them what to change, we are listening to them. And that is the greatest gift to give a child. And when we are listening, what are our children telling us? What is it that bothers them? Heavy school bags, or bullying, or caring for the elderly. These are the solutions that our children are coming up with. And the fact that this I can mindset has a power of dissolving all barriers. So any child across the world has the ability to unleash this power. It has nothing to do with resources. It has nothing to do with technology. We say you are the living curriculum. You have a heart, you have a head, you have hands, you can change the world. So I'm going to show you one example of a little village school in India where this I can mindset was cultivated and unleashed. A little child going to a school could not reach school because he had polio. And his friend decided that he's going to get Kamlesh to school. This is empathy right in action. Can we have the sound up, please? These are schools in India. And right here, I can mindset is happening.
તે ઘડી અમે રમવા જ્યારે મને 2 સમસ્યા હોતી હતી. એક ગામમાં ઝાડુ પાણીને બીજી વિકલાંગ બાળકની. તો અમારી કઈ
So they decide to look at what to change. They said we must bring Kamlesh back to school.
તો આપણે એને લાવવા માટે શું કરી શકીએ?
He says, let's lift him or bring him on a cycle. You have to see the power of this.
ભાંગી પછી અમે મોટી સાયકલ ઉપર મેકવા જઈએ અને લેવા જઈએ કાદો ઊંચકીને લઈ અને ઊંચકીને મેકવા જઈએ.
Every day they go, lift up Kamlesh, put him on a cycle and bring him to school. This is the power of ICANN. It's not about resources and infrastructure. It's about a teacher who listens. When he has to go to the bathroom, when he has to go for food, he has his friends. And these are children who get only one meal a day. Not like our children who have enough to eat.
બપોરે બી અમે ખાવાનો ટાઈમ થાય તો અમે ખાવા બેસાડીએ અને ડીશ આપીએ અને પાણી આપીએ અને ડીશ ધોઈને અમે બેસાડીએ.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the empathy right here. And these are the stories that have to be shared with the world.
દરરોજ નિશાળ આવતો થયો એટલે મને આનંદ આવે છે.
પહેલા એને આ સમસ્યાને લીધે બાળક આવી શકતો નહોતો પણ અહીંયા શાળાના બાળકોએ
The teacher says it's so inspiring to hear these. Children come up with the idea.
છે બાળકોનો એ ખૂબ સરસ છે. છોકરાને જેટલો જસ્ટ આવે
Kamlesh's grandfather. The more love you give a child, the more the child will give back.
જીવનમાં એનો પણ કઈ પરિવર્તન બદલાય.
This is the innovation we need. Right? Technology can support this, but these are the children we need the world to have. And to take this further, we have a huge opportunity. Last year we tied up with the Vatican, and looking at Papa's mandate, he says, dear children, please don't just observe life from the balcony, you must be the change. So taking his mandate to next year, we're taking 4,000 children from 100 countries with 100 solutions towards the 10 global goals to be hosted by the Vatican in Rome. And these are children like Yogesh, and these are children like Juan from Colombia. These are Anita from Bhutan. These are children who made the world a better place today, not when they're 18, not when they're adults. And that's really what Design for Change and Riverside started. So we're inviting all of you to make this happen, and we realize one thing, that if you have to get young adults to become change makers, it's not going to happen by chance. It has to happen by design, and that's really what is the work we do.
Thank you, Kiran. How do you top that?
I don't know that I can top that. That's moving. I was crying when I saw them.
I'm telling you, the stories we're getting are outstanding.
It's amazing. The way you're tackling content, I think, is terrific for what we allow our students to do, and prove to all of us that they can do it. So thank you for that. I'll start my remarks in a different place. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's my first time in Spain, period, so I'm very excited to be here. And I want to tell you a story about a boy that I got to know in California when I used to live there in 2010. But before I do that, I want to start with what I think will be a provocative statement, but maybe on the heels of that presentation it won't be, which is that our schools were not designed to optimize learning. They were literally not built for learning. And if you doubt that, I want you to think back to when you were a student. Go back to maybe the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, maybe you're in high school, wherever it was. And while you're imagining yourself in that seat in the classroom, I'll tell you the story about this boy named Jack, who I got to know in Los Altos, California. Jack was in the 5th grade in this classroom, and at the beginning of the year he came in and he got ranked 4th from the bottom in math in his class. Now, in a traditional school, what would have happened to Jack would have been that he would have been grouped into the bottom group of all the people who could do math, and that would have meant that he would never have gotten quadratic equations until high school. I agree with you, by the way. I still don't either. I'm with you. But it would have impacted his college choices and all sorts of things. And the reality was Jack, as he was struggling with double-digit multiplication and division and things of that nature, it wasn't that those lessons per se were challenging for him. He had just missed things that had occurred much earlier in his schooling, when he was in first, second, third grade. And he had developed gaps in his schooling. But the way we design schools is so that we deliver lessons. Students do the best that they can in the time that we have. Maybe it's a 3-week unit on addition, then it's a 3-week unit on subtraction. And at the end of the unit, regardless of what you have learned, mastered, retained, or the like, the whole class moves on. And this had happened to Jack repeatedly throughout his schooling career. He was about to get addition, and then they moved on. He was about to get subtraction, they moved on. By the time he got to multiplication, division, and so forth, these gaps had gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, of course, it happens the other way as well. You can imagine, I live now in Lexington, Massachusetts in the United States, which is where the beginning of the Revolutionary War that freed us from England took place. The first shots occurred there. And you can imagine someone having a field trip or maybe a summer vacation with their parents to Lexington and learning about the causes, the beginnings of the Revolutionary War, and then going back to their school the next year and having a unit on the Revolutionary War. And they'd be so excited for the first day to tell their classmates all the things that they had already known, things that they had learned. They could be the teacher. The second day, they'd be excited, going a little bit deeper. The third day, they would wonder, why are we still talking about something that we already talked about 2 days ago? And the fourth day, they would check out and just become totally bored. So both the people who already understand something grow bored and bewildered about why they're sitting there, and those who don't understand have their enthusiasm completely shredded for school. Why do we design schools like this? The answer is we did it intentionally. We literally modeled them after factories to basically group students by what we would think of as their date of manufacture, otherwise known the year that they were born. And then we basically said, the people who have designed curriculum are the world's greatest astrologists. And because you were born in the year of the Lamb, on April 15th, 1988, you will learn this. And on April 16th, you will learn that. Regardless of where I might be in my learning journey, where my interests might be, any of those questions. And the reality is, that would be great if we all learned at the exact same pace and the exact same pathway. We had the exact same background knowledge and so forth. But as cognitive scientists have shown us over and over again, and as our own lived experiences show us, we have different learning needs at different times. Some of us grab a concept really quickly, we immediately understand it, we can just work with it, we can move on to the next. Others of us take more time to really figure something out. We have to play with it for a while, we have to do a project to really get it to set into our brain. And these things all depend upon the subject or domain or area in which you're working. And the reality is, this is because we have different, what cognitive scientists would call working memory capacities, literally the ability in the front of our brain to absorb new information and manipulate it in real time with our active memory. And we all have different long-term knowledge or background experiences that we bring into learning, different assumptions, different misconceptions or conceptions that impact how we hear things, how we interpret things, and the connections that we make. And because of these differences, if we really want students to be able to fulfill their potential, be able to work to the fullest of their ability, we need to personalize the learning for where they are in their learning trajectory. And what that means, well, historically it has meant that we haven't been able to do it. Because the only way historically that we knew how to do it was to provide a personal tutor for every single student, or in groups of maybe 2 or 3 students. And the reality was we just couldn't afford a personal tutor for every single child. And so the rich and wealthy and those with access to great experts, they benefited. But most of us just sat in large classrooms, sorted by our date of manufacture, and lived with the system as we wanted it. Now, this system worked really, really well for a long period of time. That's the funny thing about it. Because it enabled us for the first time to do universal schooling. And in an industrial era economy where we didn't need every single student to fulfill that human potential, it worked well enough. But in today's world, in today's knowledge economy, in today's society, for a whole host of reasons, it's just not adequate. And we need to change the system so it can fundamentally personalize. And what I'm so excited, and I know we'll talk more about, is that I would say for the first time in over 500 years, we have a disruptive innovation emerging in education that allows us to transform learning. Now, disruptive innovation is sort of this scary term that you hear from business school professors. But what it simply means is it's an innovation that transforms things that are characterized by stuff that's complicated, expensive, deeply centralized, and inaccessible. And it makes it far more affordable, convenient, and accessible so that many more people can consume and enjoy its benefits. And we'll call this disruptive innovation the online learning, for lack of a better term. But basically, it's democratizing access to content, the world's experts, and so forth, such that we can, for the first time, really rethink what do our schools and classrooms look like, so that we can personalize learning for all students at an unbelievably high quality, and quite frankly, create far more opportunity and room to do just what you saw with really deep projects in the community that have impact on the society and culture around you. And I think it's an unbelievable opportunity. It's the first disruptive innovation since the printing press. And the really exciting thing about Jack's classroom that I've had the opportunity to visit several times when he was in 5th grade in Los Altos, California, was that they took this innovation in the form then of Khan Academy. How many people have heard of Khan Academy? So about a quarter of the room. So basically it's a free website that offers ways to learn math and science and history and all sorts of things. And they had implemented it in what they called a blended learning classroom. So some learning online, some learning with your peers and with the teacher in a school. And Jack was able to go back to the beginning of mathematics, basic numeracy, addition, subtraction concepts, and just fill in those gaps that had plagued him. And all of a sudden he started accelerating. And within just 70 days, he was no longer 4th from the bottom of his math class. He was 4th from the top. He was doing stuff that was, quote, way above grade level. And so basically in the traditional system, you started it with thinking about medical malpractice. We do educational malpractice every single day in this world. Not because of the fault of educators. They want to personalize learning for every single student. Not because of kids, but because of the way the system is literally designed intentionally to standardize the way we teach and test, which contrasts with the fact that we all need to personalize for our different needs. So I think we're living in an unbelievably exciting time, but it's a time where we need a lot of innovation to figure out the right blend and balance of all this.
Thank you, Michael. Bueno, pues no sé vosotros, pero
I don't know you, but even more questions arise when we listen to them.
This time, because you talk about disruptive and you talk about blended, but you talk about changing the system because the system has not worked or is not going to work anymore. But changing the system is very difficult, and it's not something that every teacher can do or even every school can do, and it's certainly not something that a single student or his or her family can achieve. So while the system changes because someone gets to convince whomever decides, who starts letting the student know that there's a personal rhythm or pace that he or she can follow? Like, how can a teacher find the resources that will let him or her inspire the student to find his own pace in real life?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot because when I write columns these days for various publications, I sort of assume that people who follow me have read about personalized and blended learning, and that's always a mistake. So I'll talk about the lives of teachers, and I wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying we should abolish the gifted and talented student label. Everyone is gifted and talented. And labeling people actually harms them, and especially in a world where we can personalize and create these unique opportunities. And a bunch of people said, well, that sounds great, but oh my gosh, I'm a teacher. If I have to create a lesson plan for every single student, holy cow, how am I going to do that? And so my advice is twofold, really. One, as a teacher, I would start small. I wouldn't try to transform and throw everything you've been doing out the window. Bite-sized, I think, is the way to go. Little incremental steps. And an easy one is one that you mentioned, which is flipping the classroom. In other words, students go home and they can watch the lecture online, and then they can come into the classroom and work on projects and collaborative activities with their peers. And yeah, they're still moving in lockstep because they all have the lesson. But once you've done that, my experience with teachers is then they start asking questions. Gee, Johnny didn't seem to understand that concept when he came in, and he, come to think of it, didn't master what I was asking of them to learn the day before either. Maybe I need to personalize something for him. Maybe he needs to go find another resource himself. Maybe one of the students could create a resource for him. And so you start to ask questions that lead you down this road of transformation. The second thing I would say is you don't have to invent the entire wheel yourself. There's so much sharing going on and so much creativity and collaboration right now and that's possible and also happening. There are places like Khan Academy where people are creating free resources. There are places in countries all over the world where people are creating resources specific to their society. There are teachers who are jumping on various sites and sharing their lessons and sharing their ideas. You don't have to create this yourself, and so benefit from all the resources that are out there. Quite frankly, 20 years ago, this was really daunting, but not so much anymore. There's a lot out there that can support you in this journey, and there are a lot of communities of teachers and the like that can actually support you with the individual lesson or whatever you're trying to change in the moment that can support you in this journey as well.
I was at this event recently where someone said that the process of learning is the relationship between two people. One teaches and one learns, and that if someone doesn't want to learn, he will not be taught by anyone, right? But I guess the role of the teacher is the one in the core of a lot of discussions because, and I guess it's the same in both countries where you come from, they have to comply with curriculum and they have to teach specific things. Kiran, you said, I loved when you said that the most important thing about teachers in your school and in your project in Design for Change is that they listen to kids, which is something that we don't usually do. But how do you make listening to the kids live with including the whole contents of the curricula that the kids have to learn if they have to, or every lesson that they have to go through? Like, is it possible to find the time to be someone so inspirational and at the same time the teacher that has to put whatever concepts are needed in the students' minds?
Yeah, I think there's this constant question of, can I also do content and also teach the skills? And this either or model seems to be fatiguing education. And I don't even know whether is everybody hearing on me? Just a second, my you need help. Okay, is everybody hearing? Yeah. So I find that teachers forget that they are a living curriculum themselves. I mean, within the teacher resides practically everything that we don't teach. And I look at a teacher and I say that you don't need a PhD to smile and to listen. Mm-hmm. And very often teachers forget that what they have in them is what I call a contagion. The idea of infecting somebody with joy or infecting somebody with interest or passion is what resides within us. And sometimes we don't tell our teachers enough about that. We don't tell them that they are everything that they don't need to teach. Because what you need to teach is possibly quadratic equations, right? But what you have within you is that other power that makes quadratic equation matter. Quadratic equation by itself has no real purpose. But if I don't, as a teacher, tell the story, and I keep saying it, so much of teaching has been the what to teach and how to teach it. Let's make it a little bit more creative. Let's even blend it. But who are we reaching? And why are we teaching? I think the question of who and why are oft lost. And so classrooms are all about what to teach and how to teach. And I think that's the piece that if the teachers just kind of understand that there is a who and there is a why, the what and the how is quite the easy part. Like you said, we have the Khan Academies and we have open source material. Then why isn't every child learning?
Right.
Right. The question really comes is that who are we? And I think therein lies that shift between understanding about where the content and character can both be taught. And I find that particular magic of who needs to be reached and why I need to be what am I teaching? That's really what I find is the magic of engagement and learning and everything else that we currently are calling disruptive. And I keep thinking this is just common sense. I mean, I don't think right now we're calling it an additional tool. I remember many years ago when I believe when the pen or the paper came on, that was disruptive. And suddenly you could actually archive information. That never was heard of. So somewhere we're forgetting that the common sense idea of how the human species learns, we keep pretending as if we've forgotten it and we have to reimagine it all over again. Really? Is that how children learn? Every 10 years. Really? Is this how we learn? It's the same.
Yeah.
You know, we've as a species, we've not necessarily evolved significantly. Of course, technologically, there's been a revolution, and I think that the both have to kind of have this.
Right. I think
magic.
the why and the who.
The who and the why.
The who and the why that you were talking about has a lot to do with the disruptive that Michael talks about, because the students we're teaching to right now, as a species, are the same, but they're surrounded by a very different environment.
Reality, yeah.
And that's also what makes the need to disrupt the system even more necessary, because we maybe we want to teach them the same things, but they don't receive it the same way. They have other kind of stimulus around and other sources of information. And I want to ask you, Michael, you work a lot in the field of higher education, and that's something that concerns me a lot, because what about we always talk about how to teach students at schools or high school, and then it's college, but before we go global into college, what about teaching what and how, I'm thinking of the why and the who, teach those who are starting to become a teacher? Like, who is training those who are going to be the teachers in 5-6 years time to believe in their own I can spirit, to let that spirit go forward to
Totally
kids?
agree. Yeah, I totally agree. So the insane thing I think that's occurring right now is that is that we're basically saying, because the new teachers coming into the field are familiar with technology, that they will somehow magically transform their practice because they're familiar with technology, as though technology is the answer.
Right.
When we've just been talking about the technology is a useful tool to do this stuff, but it's not the answer. It's all these other practices around, and quite frankly, awakening that human spark in people. So the challenge is that these teachers who, yes, are familiar with technology, they were brought up in the very same system that we're saying is not the right system. And so they'll use those tools in that system. And so I think you're exactly right. We have to, as teachers are being prepared and coming through colleges that are preparing them to be teachers, allow them to experience what this learning environment could be. Allow them to be directly part of it, and don't just tell them, look, everyone should buy my book, but don't just that's not really the answer, right? Like the answer isn't learning about blended learning or something like that. The answer is to experience these learning environments firsthand. What can you create together? If you got to design a school from scratch for a certain community or population in your community, what would you build? Like that, there's some really exciting opportunities, and sketch out literally, what would this look like? You built a school from scratch. Look what you came up with.
Right.
What would happen if they started to have those immersive experiences, environments themselves? So I think, yes, theory and pedagogy and things like that are important, but actually changing how they learn is maybe more so.
I guess this is a question for both of you. You decide who starts. But let's talk a bit about resources, because when we talk about innovating education, we tend to think of the immediate world we live in and forget what other realities there are. You work in your communities with different kind of resources, communities or groups. I would like to ask you if you think that if they don't have that many resources, will they respond better to the I can feeling? Like, I think of my own kids, maybe they have a lot of things, so they don't feel empowered that much by me saying, you can do this, because they're constantly doing something. So it's like, okay, I can. And maybe if they don't have that many things, they'll feel even more empowered by the message. And my question for you is, if a certain school has more resources, will they implement innovation faster, or it doesn't have anything to do with it?
Women first, ladies first.
Okay. That's a very interesting question. You know, I don't think resources or the lack of it is necessarily the deterrent for innovation. If you look at really under-resourced schools, like the story I showed you, technology wasn't the solution for that particular scenario. So, so you can still be creative and you can still solve. I think the idea is not necessarily a resource that allows you to understand a user's need. I think what we forget is innovation for the sake of innovation is absolutely actually it adds too much noise into the environment. The idea that innovation serves a human need is really at the heart of what we call empathy and design thinking, right? So I think if the user need requires technology or resources, well, so be it. The fact that a human need can be served even without it is fairly kind of understood worldwide. So I find that the idea of not understanding the user and designing innovations from assumptions is causing more damage. I mean, I have seen too many apps in the market that suggest this is the way everybody will learn to read, or this, if you just download, everybody will suddenly
crazy,
magic, right? Which is
crazy.
Which is just creating so much of noise in the environment. So I think the idea of innovation starting with the human and user need is something we don't do very well. We don't teach it also very well because it takes time. And nobody wants to slow down. Everybody wants to have a certain pace in which they work. So resources or the lack of it is, for me, has never been a deterrent. I think it's the idea of slowing down, and I keep saying possibility comes from possibility.
Right.
You really need to kind of slow down. And I think, as Michael says, the teacher feels I have only 180 days. I have to teach you everything and yet make you a good human being. Oh, that's just too much. Right? So, yeah. So I think that's what I've understood.
So your answer changed where I was going to start. Because on the design thinking basis, we take actually that front step even a step further, and we call it, what's your job to be done? And by that we mean, what's the circumstance you're in, your situation, and the struggle you're facing and the progress you're trying to make in that struggle. So not all needs are equal. You prioritize and you're willing to make trade-offs. And so understanding that situation and what success looks like for you is absolutely critical. And there is no innovation, I would say, unless you're really aiming at that progress that people are trying to genuinely make in their situation. And all this talk of disruptive innovation and stuff like that, it does not work ultimately unless you're actually doing a meaningful job in people's lives. So with that as a starting point, the second thing I'll say is, to your question, on a more theoretical level, disruptive innovation by its nature starts with those people who don't have what's out there right now. And so actually people that can't afford that personal tutor or that small group experience and whatnot, that's the place where it's most likely to take root. And I'll tell you a story where it just happened last week, actually. I was with some small private schools in the United States. They charge lots of money for people to go to them, and they're losing enrollments. They're trying to figure out why and how to turn themselves around. And one of them came up to me, and the school head said, I have 4 students to one teacher in my school.
That's a good thing.
Can you imagine? And he said, I think I need to make it a little lower cost, so I'd like to move to 5 students to one teacher.
Yay.
How can I use blended learning to help me do this? And I said, huh? And he said, well, you've written the book on blended learning. As I go from 4 to 5, how should I use blended learning? I said, why would you use blended learning?
Yeah.
Like,
Why would
why
you
is
need it?
technology an answer
Yes.
there? And so I actually think the most well-off places are the last place in the world that will use this in many cases, because the Lexington where my kids are going to go to school, they look around, they do fine. Whether it's because of the schools or because of the families they come from, we can debate that another time, but they do fine. So they're not eager to change and screw up a good thing. Places that don't have something, they're motivated to try to figure it out and do it better. And so there's a lot more motivation. And the last story I would tell is, I think the most promising innovations right now are in the developing world where there's no school. We know 250 million high school and middle school and some elementary school age kids around the world literally don't have access to school with teachers who can really teach. And there, the experiment of what's called autonomous learning. Can you give them a tablet and allow them to get basic numeracy and literacy skills? I think there's some really promising experiments, and some of which I'm involved with, that is going to transform the learning, and then it's going to allow us to ask the question that we should have been not asking but just doing all along, which is, what's the role of the human? And it's that spark, it's that magical moment, it's that relevance, it's that imbuing faith in you, it's all those things that you can do. And I think the biggest innovations are going to occur there first, and then it's going to ripple up as we say, oh my gosh, of course that's how it's done. Like delivering the lesson on the quadratic equation. We're really picking on that right now.
I know, my maths teacher is going to
But
get really
I know. But I think it's the right question, because why should be where we start most things. There are plenty of people who can deliver that in a great way. There's plenty of software that can deliver that lesson in a great way. What it can't do is come into that moment between a human being and someone else and tell the right story at the right time to uplift and motivate and excite that person about whatever their bigger journey is.
Right.
And we learn through stories.
So we've talked about the system that definitely has to change. We've talked about the student who should get inspired, should be listened to, and should be encouraged to follow his own pace, his own rhythm, and respect his background when it comes to what he knows before he goes to class. We've talked about the teacher. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a mom. So let's talk for a minute about families. Because when it comes to education, which has a lot of different little words inside of just one of it, you educate, but you teach, you nurture, you guide, you accompany, you sometimes do things very wrong. But when it comes to education at schools and a little bit of digital and how a teacher teaches, I wonder whether families are an element of advancing or an element of getting stuck where we are. Many times I talk to my kids, or I talk to parents at the school where my kids go, and you will have that discussion of parents who don't know what their kids' homework is because it's on a tablet, or parents who don't understand why the kids are watching a video on YouTube in class instead of learning the equation of the evening. I'd like to know what your opinion is as to the role of families in walking together with this spirit of encouraging kids to being able to believe they can, and to then doing.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
there is it's not an easy sort of place for especially this generation of parents to be. I think maybe in another 10 years the generation would have grown up with the blended understanding and therefore been easier. I find that the parents I deal with are still of the old school, where learning meant a textbook and hours of quiet, and that's it. And the fact that there is so much uncurated information that they will have to navigate whilst making sense of information that they need to have is such a open, sort of messy world. So whilst a child might be looking at a video for purpose of the class, what opens up alongside is several other videos that are not part of the class, and therefore I could get distracted or waylaid. So some, of course, as research has clearly talked to us about the role of multitasking and how it plays against the idea of learning. So we know that. We know what research has to say about the multiple ways in which the mind functions doesn't allow for real meaningful learning. So the mind needs to slow down. The mind needs to kind of, have the time to process information. So there are real challenges in the space. While technology might bring so much personalization and the ability to work at my pace, it also has the ability to kind of divert and distract. So I think counseling parents on the role that it's not just a wasted time has never been more important for us. And I think the idea of getting parents involved in this journey to help understand how soon, how much, I think these are the questions, and what for, has now become a very important part of the role the school now needs to play. So I think all of this has meant an additional conversation and counseling, and I think but the unfortunate part is also the fact that parents don't often practice what they preach. So you have parents who are constantly on their tablets, their mobile phones, their thing, and saying, oh, you must study. And I've had children coming and telling me, but my mother doesn't do, my father doesn't do this, and they were asking me. So it's a very, very interesting time. So I think whilst counseling parents is good, I know my friend Howard Gardner once had this to say. He said, if you want to know what families do, find out not what they say at a dinner table, what they do at a dinner table.
Right.
It'll speak volumes about how that relationship at home needs to kind of spill over and become one part of what we do at school.
If you want to know what my family does, you just have to ask my youngest kid. He'll tell you all the details. Yes, even the ones I don't want him to say.
Yes.
So first I'll say I totally agree with everything that you just said. The only thing I'll add is twofold, I guess. Broadly speaking, to answer your question, I think parents are a small c conservative force in schools, meaning that they're more, they hold back this occurring because it wasn't the way it was done for me, or I don't see those kids having that experience, whatever it might be. And so I find that they tend to hold things back, and people love to shout about politicians and stuff like that. In public schools, parents actually are a much stronger constituency than people recognize, and so I think they often are a counterweight to this, and that just means you really need to communicate with them. Now, the second thing I will say is I have learned over the years that when you point a finger at someone else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. And what I mean by that is I just pointed my finger at parents. I think people like me who've made the case for these new learning environments and the like, I tend to write for educators and policymakers in that order. I don't tend to write for parents that much. And I don't think we've done a good job of selling this to parents in the ways that they would get excited about, that would solve their pain points and their problems and the progress that they're seeking in the lives of their families and their kids. And so and I'm not saying I have the answer on this, but I think we have to spend a lot more time focusing on why should parents get excited about this, and what problem does it solve for them?
I'm very happy to hear you say that, because I completely agree. We haven't yet explained to families how to travel along this change in education. I think I know your answer. Por cierto, nos queda como 10-15 minutos.
By the way, we have like 5-10 minutes. If anyone among the audience, if you want to ask any questions, raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. Even if everybody tells me that I always have my cell phone on me, I forgot it now. So if there are any questions through Twitter, you can tell me. I'm so satisfied for not being stuck to my cell phone today.
Change and improve. Not how we teach, but why we teach, and think of who we teach. Should we focus on the contents, on the tools, or on the people?
You probably know I'll say people, but but I actually think it's bigger than that. To me, I think it's the learning model itself. Like I actually don't think it's fair to just blame it on people. When people say, "Oh, how could someone do such a stupid thing?" My experience is people don't do stupid things because they're stupid people. They do it because they operate in a context where that feels like the smart thing to do. And so you have to change the context itself to help them make those different decisions. And so from my perspective, it's the model is the most important thing. And I will make a plug. I've been ripping on the quadratic equation alongside of you, and I agree. But I will make a plug that I think content still deeply matters. And I do think we have to be careful in this world where we say, oh, content is a commodity, you can get it anywhere, and that is all true, that we don't forget that there are basics that are very important to help students understand and know, that should be coherently woven through a very broad, rich curriculum, so that they have a cultural fluency that they can be part of a society. And I think that's an important thing. And so one of the things that I've set up in the last few years was a fund with the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City that is funding schools. Part of it is funding schools that use blended learning designs with a content-rich curriculum, and sort of meld these two worlds that have sometimes seemed at odds with each other. Because I think most of the dichotomies we create in education for ourselves are false dichotomies. But I do think content is important, and so I don't want to totally overlook this. I think we need to think about the what.
So it's people and
But I guess I would say models, people, content, and I probably put tools dead last by some measure, actually.
And can you give us a short, fast example of blended learning in a classroom?
Sure. So I'll give you a school in Los Angeles, California that one of my favorites. It's an elementary school that didn't have enough money to open up with the teachers that they wanted to. And so there they have a simple station rotation model. It's basically a centers model for elementary school that's very popular around the world, but one of the centers is online learning, and what it enables you to do is small group instruction. So in a class of 30 students, 10 students are on the computers, 10 students are doing projects with each other, and 10 students are in small group environment with the teacher. And it's an amazingly successful school. By the traditional metrics, it's like the third best school in California, with a population that's 90% students on free lunch. And they think the secret sauce is the small group opportunities with the teachers, because you've gotten to a 10-to-1 ratio, and you can constantly regroup that based on the dynamic data you're getting from the online learning, depending on the teacher's purpose.
Okay. Kiran, I know you're all about I can, but when I listen to some of your talks, which I always find online, so thanks technology for that too, because you're able to listen to people talking about interesting things. Every time I hear you explain about I can, I think about why we've let children think about their I can'ts for so long. And I've also heard you say that we've let them, by thinking I can't, always think of the worst instead of thinking of the best possible scenario or the best possible thing they can do. I'd like you to talk a bit more about the power of really inspiring a child as early as possible about his own power inside of changing things. Because you said it, they say I come from since they're very young, but they then forget it for a while because we let them. If we are not in one of your schools and we don't have the tools to use that with them at school, how can we encourage the I can in children?
Well, I think, and I say this again and again, children might not listen to you, but they will always mimic you. And I think therein lies that basic power. I mean, they are watching. They are intensely watching you. As a parent, they watch you. As an adult, they're watching you. And if you ask any child when they come home and say, mimic what's happening in school, they will mimic a teacher. And they will mimic exactly what they're observing, even when you're not teaching them. So the power of mimicking is the greatest responsibility a teacher has when they walk into a class. The fact that you know that a student is going to pick up those little habits, the way you talk to each other, the way you sit down and listen to a child, the way you encourage a question, the way you respond to a conflict. They are picking all of this up, just like they pick up what happens at home. So you remove all tools, you remove any technology, you remove everything. I keep saying you're finally the one that they're mimicking. And that's where the I can come in, or the I can't. And I think as adults, we've mimicked whatever we have learned. So we tend to fall back on patterns. That's how the human brain functions. We fall back on patterns that are familiar, that we've understood, that require as little exercise that is needed. It's most convenient. Right. It's so convenient to talk to a class that is compliant. It's so much easier to talk to a class that is quiet. I get this false sense that everybody's listened, everybody's fine, everybody's good. So the idea that we as a human race also work from convenience, work from our comfort level, work from our own mimicking, means that our children will often play that out. So when you say about an I can or an I can't, it's pretty much what it is. There is no halfway between, there is no I tried. Right? It's I can or I can't. And I think that's where we as adults and as teachers don't often, or we've never, I don't think in a professional development program for teachers, I'm not sure in the degrees that they learn, there is enough and more focus on who I am as a human being. And there is so much being taught about pedagogy and technology, etc. But self-awareness and who I am as a person counts for what I will bring to a class. Everything else can be, like I said, beautifully taken care of by technology and blended and tools and textbooks. But I am that secret sauce finally. Right. It comes down to me. And I find that teachers don't even smile when they walk into a classroom. Look at us as a human race, we stop smiling. We're constantly on an iPad, on a laptop, on a telephone. So you walk into a subway, everybody's down. Because it's so difficult to see you in your face, because suddenly you smile and I have to smile back. I might have to engage. Who wants to do that work? It's too much work. So I find that secret sauce, I keep telling a teacher, I say, you are the magic. It's all here. Somebody once very wisely told me, he said, when you walk into a class, especially with young children, you are next to God. Take that very responsibly. Because I've had so many parents come and tell me, if you tell them no, they will listen. Because a teacher has this exalted, place in a young child's life. Man, we have to take it seriously. Yeah. We really have to. And I think it starts there. We plant those seeds there.
The EnlightED conference that began today is focused on reinventing education in a digital world, which would be, in your opinion, both of you, the biggest challenge that we're facing, and which is the biggest opportunity to have to achieve such a reinvention. Michael?
I think it's an amazing opportunity we're living in right now. I think for the first time we have the capability to reinvent the system in 100 years. And like I made the printing press analogy that democratized access to knowledge. We can do so interactively in ways we could never have imagined 30 years ago. And so I think there's challenges, to be sure. And to be sure, being a parent right now, I totally agree, is very difficult to figure out and navigate. But the opportunities that are at our children's fingertips to create and learn, it's amazing. And I think I'm listening to you and I'm sitting here thinking about all the times I've messed up as a parent in the last week, and did I model behavior right, and kindness and compassion and things like that. But net, like, hugging your kid and telling them that you love them and that they can do anything, and then seeing that they can do anything and that they can create things and modeling that every day. I think we're all living in an unbelievable time where that's democratized in ways that we could never have imagined before.
What about you, Kiran?
I think for me, we've had very smart people in the world do very bad things. In history has enough and more examples of scientists that have messed up and created, bombs, and you've got doctors who have, killed children for less than anything else. So I don't think that's the worry. For me, technology, if it's not in service of a more desirable, sustainable future, is meaningless for me. And I think the fact that technology offers so much opportunity is so exciting, because for the first time, you can pretty much see things and do things you never thought possible. But it starts again. It starts again with the person who's doing it or using it for the service of a larger good. Again, we forget history. We forget everything that technology has been in the past. In history, where extremely intelligent and whatever smart leaders have done really bad things. So I think the point is, if we do not understand that power in our hands, the point of misuse and abuse is far higher, because now the rate and pace of that change is so quick that we are now living in a world where fake news has become another word in a dictionary. We've never had that. That the fact that we don't know what truth is anymore. We don't have time to slow down and figure out how we snap, judge, and send information away on a click. Yeah. And the amount of damage that can do. And to then undo it is so much more. So it's a fascinating time. And the idea that we in schools or whatever that might be in the future, that our children need to be to understand what that power might be, is going to be the reason why schools would exist. I think that's really what will be the main reason.
Yeah, just to pile on really quickly, I totally agree with those challenges, and why I think it's such an opportunity, though, amidst that, is because no one knows what that future should or will look like, and as educators, you get to create it right now.
Yeah, right.
You get to design it right now.
Absolutely.
What an opportunity.
Se nos acaba el tiempo. Gracias a Michael.
We're running out of time. Thank you, Michael and Kiran, for joining us. Thank you for all those of you coming here, or those of you following us on streaming. While all these changes are taking place, children and youngsters are growing up in a digitalized world, a very fast world, but they need us adults to accompany them in this process. They need us to help them making decisions and develop their talent, and to become in the future the best version of themselves. When we talk about innovation in education, when we talk about being disruptive and causing change, it's obviously a responsibility of all governments and big companies. It's also our responsibility, Kiran and Michael's responsibility, speaking in the world. It's responsibility of the universities and teachers. It's also the responsibility of parents. It's all of our responsibility. And that's the spirit of EnlightED. That's what we should embrace. We need to recognize that we have challenges associated to digitalization of our society and to the pace that we are living in. Everything changed. The way we do things changed, and we need to face those challenges. But if we see the opportunity of doing things in a different way, we will face them better. We need an I can, you can, let's do it, or whatever. So I encourage you to put this into practice as much as we can, to be change agents ourselves and help those who are growing up.